most of you, I know a lot of you. I went to youth group here when I was but a wee little kid. Younger, back in my prime. But a lot of you know my story. Some of you don't. I have a daughter. She will be 4 in December. I know. Tell me about it. I'm getting old. And so she is quite the testimony to my life. I've grown up in faith. I grew up in church. This youth group helped build my foundation in faith. But going through something like I went through gives you no choice but to turn to God in times of strife. So I'm just going to give you, I would say quick, but it's pretty much my whole entire thing is testimony with a little added at the end. So when I got pregnant, it's not ideal, obviously. I mean, I was young, not married, but it happens. So it was what it was. I had a fairly normal, healthy pregnancy besides being swollen and miserable, but that's about status for the quo, I think. But the day, she was due December 1st, but my water broke on December 3rd. They make you do the rigmarole. Oh, you have to go to the doctor first to make sure you didn't actually wet yourself. And I'm like, I'm about 100% sure that didn't happen. But I went anyway, did what they told me to do. And they prescribed stuff to get my labor started once I got to the hospital. So once I got there, the doctor was in a previously scheduled C-section, so he couldn't see me right away. So I was just laying there, and every once in a while, the nurses would come in, right? And they would be like, oh, I think you need to lay on your side for a little bit. And I'd never had a kid before, so I'm assuming all of this is normal. And then a little bit later, she came back in, and she was like, I think we need to put an oxygen mask on you. And I was like, okay, probably, still normal. And then they came in, finally, and I was like, why are you in here so much? Is this normal? And they were like, well, the baby's heart rate is up and down, and we're just trying to do things to make the heart rate go up. Because my water broke, so there was more pressure on the cord, so it was depriving her of oxygen. So they were like, not to scare you, but we're going to go ahead and prep you for a C-section. Worst case, when the doctor gets out here, he'll talk to you and see, but we just want to have you ready just in case. And so I'm like, okay, you say you don't want to freak me out, but here you are freaking me out. But it was fine. They did what they had to do. And finally the doctor came in and he did this procedure to put more fluid in there, in my uterus, I guess, to relieve pressure. So she would be able to be delivered normally. And when he did that, it was the most excruciating pain ever. And my placenta broke. So Maddie's supposed to be breathing when the placenta breaks, right? But she's not, she's still in me. So gory mess, like trail of blood to the OR. And I worked in the OR at the time. I was a nursing assistant. So I know some medical things, not a lot by any means, but when it happened, he looked up at the nurse and said, call the code. And I know that that's not good. So they called a code blue over the hospital and they rushed me to the OR. And I knew it was bad because codes, I've been in a few codes and they're never good, ever. So they rushed me to the OR. And as they pushed the doors open, all of my friends that are in there, because the nurses, techs, they were all crying. And I was like, oh my God, maybe this is way worse than I thought. So they go in there and they do what they have to do. And it's like silent. You want them to do what they have to do because you want them to do a good job. But I was just laying there and I was like, what's happening? And it was just terrifying. What was going to happen? Is she okay? Am I going to be okay? And you could hear a pin drop and everybody was so serious, like diligently doing what they were supposed to be doing. But one of the nurses, Cheryl Taylor, saw that I was freaked out and she came and sat by my head and just held my hand until I was under, which doesn't seem like a big deal, but in the moment, I mean, it made the world of difference. Just the comfort of knowing someone was right there. And in comes the anesthesiologist, and he's so chill, laid back, and he's like, so what are we doing today? And I was like, put me under now. Like, do you not sense the tenseness in the room? So they put me under because I didn't have an epidural. And that was probably the best thing that could have happened, because had I been awake when she was born, it would have been bad. Like, I would have been climbing out of the table and like doing things I probably shouldn't have. So Maddie was born from the time they called the code from the time that she was born was 12 minutes. And you think I was in a labor and delivery room and they wheeled me there. I don't even think he scrubbed. He just like got his stuff on. And I mean, normal C-section, Belinda will be able to tell you better than I am, but normally when they like start to cut, it takes it like 5 minutes at least to just get the baby out. And it was 12 minutes and she was born. And APGARs are like the test for babies to, see if they're going to make it or not. And I learned in the first one, it goes up to 10. I thought it only went up to 5, but it goes up to 10. And Maddie was a 1. She wasn't breathing. She was blue. And they did CPR for 30 minutes. They did CPR. It took them 30 minutes to bring her back. And you just think about like 30 minutes. We've been in church. We've started for about 30 minutes now. And that's how long they were doing CPR on her. And it's just like, and I'm sure that any situation, even if they don't like personally know them, that it's terrifying. You have this tiny baby's life in your hand. This mom who was just about to bleed out, her life's in your hands, and they knew me. So it made it like extra personal. And I'm sure that it was absolutely terrifying for them. But they did it, they brought her back. And the doctor later told me that when we went in there, the neonatologist wasn't in the room. But he said because of what happened to Maddie, now if it's still true, I don't know, but what happened to her, they're required to have a neonatologist in every C-section now. So, I mean, lots of good came from this, don't get me wrong, because she's perfectly healthy, but it's cool to know that it wasn't for naught, that something positive came. So hopefully the next mom that it happens to, it won't be quite so severe. But they did that. She was awake, CPR, and I was finally waking up and I was in the recovery room. And the recovery room, they put the mom at like a catty corner in the corner, and I could see the OR. I mean, I was just in the OR the previous day, doing work, and you could see it, and it was like a gory mess. And everyone's like, the doctor's sitting down at the table taking notes or whatever, and there were nurses like all around, and I'm just sitting there looking around, and I'm like, no one's looking at me, right? So I'm like, where is she? And no one acknowledges that I'm even speaking. And I'm like, where is she? And I'm sure that I had been awake for 20 minutes and asking for every 5 seconds for the past 20 minutes. But I was finally awake and I wanted to know, you need to tell me again. And so finally I was like, where is she? And the doctor looked up and he walked over and at the foot of my bed and he put his hand on my foot and he said, Brittany, we don't think she's going to make it. And it's just, I mean, when you think if you were in that situation, right, and you hear that news that you would lose it, you would scream and cry and kick and like it's the end of your world, right? But I didn't. I just sat there and I stared at him. Bless his heart. He was probably so uncomfortable, but I was just went numb. I felt literally nothing. I felt nothing. And I was laying there and he was staring at me, waiting for me to cry or do something. And I was staring at him. And then he was like, okay, well, I'm going to go back over here now. Like, bless his heart. He was probably so uncomfortable. And I was just sat there and I didn't know what to do. What do you do? What do you say? Like, where is she? And I just sat there and I looked and 3 of my bosses ran down the hallway and I was like, oh God, what if they're running to her and she's like dead right now, And then in comes Maddie's dad and my mom and they're sobbing their eyes out. I mean, sobbing. And I'm like, oh my God, this is it. They're coming to tell me that she didn't make it. This is it. And I just look at them and they don't say anything. They just sit there and cry. And I'm like, somebody say something. Like, what is happening? And, so they just sat there and finally they, she had to be flown to DC with a helicopter, but she wasn't stable enough to fly yet. So they had to wait a couple hours to make sure that she would survive the flight before they took her. And they asked me, because I couldn't leave. I just had major surgery. And they asked me if I wanted to stay in mother baby or if I wanted, labor and delivery, or if I wanted to go to mother baby. And I was like, well, I want to stay in labor and delivery. I didn't think emotionally I could handle hearing babies cry right next door. But I shouldn't have done that because they had more important things. They had people, I had already given birth. There were people actively giving birth. So they didn't check on me all night, and it was just a mess. And poor Emma came in that night and I'm sure the next morning before they moved me and she was sitting at the foot of the bed and they were changing whatever was under me. And I'm 100% sure she got more of a view than she intended when she came to visit me. But she helped me move and we moved to mother baby. And I remember that night was the longest night of my life. I think I got to see her around 4 something. I think. 5 something. It's all a blur. When you go under anesthesia, you just get like bits and pieces of what's happened. And so they took me in to see her before she left. And they took me into the NICU at PRMC is pretty small, and they've got, cubes everywhere. And they roll my giant bed in there, and I'm touching all these cubes with my bed. I'm looking at her, and she was still blue. I mean, she had the tube in her throat. She had 7 billion tubes coming out of her belly button. And it was just petrifying. She had holes all in her foot from them drawing blood or doing whatever. And that'll break any parent's heart. You know what I mean? She just was born. What did she do? What did I do to cause this to happen? Like, there's so many guilt and anger and just unexplained feelings and that's when I lost it. When I saw her, I lost it. And in comes the helicopter people and their like helmets, and that was overwhelming, and their big giant incubator thing. And they were like, "So what's her name?" And I'm like, "What? I don't know. I just met her 5 seconds ago." But they took her and they flew her there, and I couldn't go. Obviously, I was stuck. But that night was the longest night of my life. I remember laying in bed, and my mom, bless her heart, was in like a chair, probably about that uncomfortable for all night. And I was laying there. The TV wouldn't work. I know the clock was to my right, and I remember just laying like this all night long, staring at the clock. I saw every minute, and like every 15 minutes, I was just like, "God, please, let her live." And at this point, if she made it, she was going to have brain damage. Like they said, "Prepare yourself. This is what's going to happen." She went 30 minutes without oxygen to her brain. There's no way. Like, she will have brain damage. We just don't know how bad it'll be. And so every 15 minutes, I was just like, "God, please let her live. Let her live. If she's got brain damage, fine. We'll deal with it. She'll be fine. We'll be fine. Just let her live." And it was like the longest night. And then, the next couple of days, I was in PRMC 2 days before they let me go to be with her. And her dad would call me, give me updates. And I remember not answering my phone, which, is kind of crappy in hindsight. But I just thought each time the phone rang that he was going to tell me that she was gone. She didn't make it. So I just didn't answer. I mean, I did every once in a while, but I was just scared to death that the next phone call was going to be the one to tell me that, she didn't make it. And then poor Caroline, she was having finals, I think, and I was ignoring her too. And finally, Mr. Martin texted me and was like, "Look, can you please just update Caroline?" But I didn't know what to say to people. I didn't know if she was going to make it, what was going to be wrong with her. But finally, the doctor came in and I could walk. So he was like, "You can go. It's early for C-section moms, but you could go ahead and go." So Mom drove me up to DC, and I remember the trip was like the longest one ever. And I was so nervous because I couldn't hold her. Yes, it was the worst. You couldn't hold her. And so I just remember, I think I was wearing this ring and I was just spinning this ring the whole car. And my mom just kept like side-eyeing me, waiting for me to start crying or something. But, so it was like a 2.5 hour car ride. Finally got there, could see her. And they did what is called a cooling procedure on her to prevent farther brain damage. So it's like, I don't know if this is the technical terms for it, but it was like a fan up at the top of her head. And it was this white cloth thing that went on top of her head. And it blew cool air, I assume, to her because they brought her core temperature down to hypothermia, which means you couldn't touch her. She had no blankets because they didn't want her to be warm. So she was just laying there like all exposed. And, you couldn't touch her. I mean, I could put my finger in her hand or whatever, but I couldn't hold her. And that was like the hardest part. You're finally there. I could finally be there, but I couldn't be there, And so we got there probably 6, 7, and visiting time for people who aren't parents stops at 8. And they had already gotten like a Ronald McDonald House, which was a godsend because hotel expenses would have been out of the world. And so around 9, I think, because Mom was there and her dad's brother was there. So we finally went back to the Ronald McDonald House. And the next day I got up early and went. And I noticed on the walk inside, because, I'm stubborn and I didn't want a wheelchair. So I was like, "No, I'm fine. Leave me alone. Let me get in there." That my leg was really hurting, like bad. And I was like, okay, maybe it's related to C-section. Maybe this is just a normal occurrence. But then it got to the point where I could hardly walk. Like I was limping pretty severely. And I looked at my leg and there was a red spot right here, and it was warm to the touch. And then there was another one down here. And so being in the medical field, I knew that was probably a blood clot. And my calf hurt really bad. So before I left PRMC, Dr. Juris, who is amazing, was like, if you need anything at all, please call me. Anything at all. I don't care how big or small, call me. And I should have got his cell phone number, because when I called the office, they were like, we can't let you talk to him. And here I am, a hormonal mess. I'm like, but he said I could call him. Let me talk. But they wouldn't let me talk to him. So I told them my issue, right? I said, it hurts when I walk. My leg hurts. And I have 2 red spots that are warm. And they're like, oh, no, that's not a blood clot. You wouldn't have 2. Blood clots are never 2 of them. It's just 1. And I'm like, okay, you're probably an idiot, but maybe you're right, So I blew it off. And then as the day went on, it started to hurt really bad. So I asked Maddie's nurse, I was like, look, I know your specialty is babies, but is this of concern? And she was like, yeah, you need to go to the hospital right now. And I was like, okay. So we went to Target instead. Because they told me that she was going to be there for weeks. And I was like, okay, before I go to the hospital, I need to get food. I need to get some more clothes. I need to, I had a list of things that I wanted to do. And I was a hormonal mess, so nobody argued with me. And we went to Target to get things. And we went back to the Ronald McDonald House and put the stuff away. And then we went back to the hospital, and the same nurse was still on shift about to get off. She was like, wow, I didn't think I'd see you back today. I thought that they'd keep you. I thought I'd see you, in a couple days. And I was like, oh, I haven't been yet. And she was like, Brittany, go right now. And I was like, okay, maybe this is serious. So I went, and it was late. I had to find a hospital that was in network for my insurance, which is an annoying thing to have to be concerned about when you're going through something like that. But found one right across the street from Maddie's hospital, and went to the ER. And it's in the city. It's in DC. So there's 572 people in there. I'm kidding. That's an exaggeration. I don't know, but it was a lot. And I was waiting forever in the most uncomfortable chairs, just had major surgery. And I didn't want to take pain medicine because I was pumping, that was the only thing I felt like I could do to help her. So I try not to take any pain medicine so it wouldn't be in the milk, doing all that. And finally they called me back. I think it was around 1. They took me back for an ultrasound on my leg, and the tech, they're never supposed to tell you. They can't diagnose you. And I was like, so I know you're not, but can you just give me a ballpark estimate? And she was like, it's a blood clot. And I was like, oh, great. So it wasn't a deep vein thrombosis, which is good because that can go to your heart and all sorts of stuff. But it was tricky. It was superficial, but there was 2 of them, right? And there was a string between the 2 at the bend of my knee. And the concern was the more I bent my knee, it would, cut it in half and one would travel. And so that deemed need for blood thinners. So I had to give myself a shot 2 times a day in the stomach for 6 weeks. And then be put in the hospital. It deemed hospitalization. And literally from my window, I could see Maddie's hospital. And I was like, here I am again, stuck, cannot see her. And I was there for 2 days. And because they wanted me to be well knowledgeable on how to inject myself. And I was like, wipe, stick, push. There's not much to it. Let me go. And it was 2 days, I think I was in the hospital. And the doctor came in. He was like, well, I really think you need to stay another day because I just feel like you need to learn more about how to do it. And I cried a lot. And I was like, you need to let me go right now. She's right there and I need to be there. And I know how to do it. I've done it 5 times. And I was just going on. And he probably felt sorry for me or wanted me to shut up because he was like, okay, fine. And so I got out that afternoon. And by that time, Maddie had the tube taken out. And when I went to the ER a couple days before, they started to warm her up, which is a process because they can't just turn the heat on. It had to be a slow process so it wouldn't cause further damage. So by the time I got to her, she was warm and I could hold her. So she was 6 days old when I could hold her for the first time. And she had some IVs still. I think she might have had an NG tube still. And the heart monitors and stuff, but the intubation was gone and she was awake for the most part. She was on pain meds too, so she was in and out more than normal. But I finally got to hold her when she was 6 days old. And the next, I don't know, couple days were just a blur. I mean, there, not there, going back and forth. And they said, the hardest thing that these kids who have brain damage to learn for them is to eat. So she very well may have to stay here for a couple weeks to be on an NG tube. So expect that, But she was taken to a bottle really well and then started to nurse her, and she was a rock star. But then she like backslid a little bit, and they were like, okay, if she doesn't nurse by tomorrow, then, we're going to have to put the tube back in her and you're going to be here for another week. And I was like, give us time. But she did. She was a rock star, pulled through. And then finally, I think it was day 11, we got to go home. So the concern was, during this process, she had EEGs, MRIs, to check her brain level and functioning, and the cooling thing to prevent farther brain damage. And she had 11, I think, blood transfusions. It was a lot in 11 days. It was a lot. And Children's is great. They have like huddles outside the NICU every morning with like the army of doctors ready to like go in and save the day. And they tell you your game plan. And I can't say enough good about the hospital. They did amazing things, and they had social workers there. And the social worker was actually from Still Hill, which was pretty cool. But she was just like, so how are you? And I was like, fine. Like, it was eerie. The whole, like, I was scared to death. Don't get me wrong. And it was absolutely terrifying. But I was calm for the whole time. It was just like an eerie sense of it's going to be all right. And I think she was freaked out by it, honestly. She was like, are you sure I can't do anything for you? And I'm like, what do you want? What do you want me to cry? Do you want me to have a breakdown? Like, what do you want from me right now? Leave me alone. I'm fine. Unless you keep talking to me, and then I won't be fine. But it was just a sense of calmness the whole entire time that everything was going to be fine. So we got home, and then 2 days later we had to go back for an MRI, like a final MRI, to see how her brain level was. And that was the longest 2 days, because you don't get those results right away. You have to wait. And so 2 days, I got the phone call. Her brain was perfectly fine. No brain damage whatsoever. But God. And it was just, and she did have some follow-ups. She was a part of a case study, where every 6 months until she was 2, I think, we went back. So psychiatrists and neurologists could evaluate her to make sure, everything was copacetic, to see if the normal issues that were normal for these types of kids were normal for her. But each time they said, she's fine. She's healthy. She's perfect. And it was just like such a relief, every time I knew she was perfect, because she was functioning, cooing, eyeing, doing everything in the milestones that she was supposed to do. But just having their, extra gold star on there made the difference. And it was just an absolutely terrifying experience. You don't wish that upon anybody. Things happen, and, people around you don't know what to say. They don't. They're awkward. They say things with good intentions that they mean well, but sometimes you're just like, okay, and some things this one thing in particular that people said to me was, don't worry. God never gives you more than you can handle. And I was like, what? I can't handle this. You know what I mean? This is too much for me. I can't do this by myself. I have a solid support system, I had that, but I can't do this by myself. He gives us more than we can handle because he wants us to seek his comfort and his grace. He puts us in a situation where we are forced to turn to him and seek his help. And just how, like, tying it back to Gideon and the Israelites. So, like, a little summary of that is, so the Israelites did evil, right? And this is just a general summary because, I'm no biblical expert by any means. So the Midianites oppressed them for 7 years, took their crops, cattle, forced them to cry out to God. And then an angel appeared to Gideon and said, it's you, bro. It's your time to shine. You go defeat the Midianites. And so he was skeptic, of course, and he knew it was too much for him to handle. So he sought out God. They started with 30,000 men, and God was like, nope, too many. They'll see you coming. So they went down to 10,000 men, and he was like, still too many, Gideon. And of course, he's like, well, what do you want me to do then? What do you want me to fight? How am I supposed to win with less than 10,000 men? And it was something about to narrow them down, take them to a pond, and if they drink from their hands, then one thing, and if they get down and suck it with their face, or that was probably said really rude. if they like drink it straight with their mouth, then that's another thing. So I forget which one's which, but one group got sent and one group stayed, and it was down to 300 men. So Gideon took 300 men and defeated the Midianites with God's help. He knew that it was too much for himself, so he was forced to seek out God, just like the Israelites were forced to seek out God. And so in that time with Maddie, and I'm sure Gideon probably felt the same way, you sit there and you're praying, right? And you're like, okay, he's not going to hear me. I'm this little old girl from Salisbury, and he's got problems much bigger than mine. But at the same time, the problem was too big for me. So who do I go to? So you turn to God, but he has there's nothing too big or too small for him. And a sick child, a sick grandchild, a parent dying, a spouse dying, people being ill that you're close to, or even losing a pet, they're like family. Addiction is rampant in society. People you love, people it's happened. That is too much for one person to handle. It's too much. He wants us to go to him for comfort, and he wants us to know that it is okay to be overwhelmed. There is no shame in saying, I can't do this by myself, because I couldn't. There's no way. I would have been a blubbering mess the whole entire time. And if people are, everybody copes different. Everybody copes different. But I just had this sense of calmness about me that everything was going to be fine, and I think that was God. He put his hand in it and he calmed my nerves and just had a sense of calmness about the whole situation. And when we go to him for comfort, he will provide us with what we need. And he did. I had a solid support system. My parents were great. Her dad was great in that time that everything was happening. And, even now, he's put someone in my life who is a blessing every single day. Like, he will put people in your life who can get you through it, and he will be there to get you through it. And he wants us to know that he's there. He wants us to turn to him, and that through our relationship with him, that someday we will feel no pains. We will feel no burdens or trials or tribulations, and we will walk heaven with our loved ones that we've lost, and that there is more to come after this life, no matter how bad or how crappy situations are that you go through, that one day we will feel a sense of calmness, and one day we will feel no pain. And he wants us to take comfort in knowing that there is eternal life with no pains, that one day we will get there, and what we're gone through and what we've gone through won't matter, as long as we get there. So he tells us in Matthew 11:28, come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. So if we go to him, he will calm our fears. It may take a while. Everybody's walk is different, every situation, everybody handles stress differently. But if we turn to him, eventually, the way he works things, it will all work out. It will all work out. So I propose that instead of, if somebody's having a hard time with something, we don't say to them, God doesn't give you more than you can handle. We say, God will get you through what he puts you in. And even, sometimes we don't know what to say to people. And sometimes you don't need to say anything. The night that Maddie was born and I was laying in labor and delivery, I had a friend who was a nursing assistant and mother baby, and she just got off her shift, I think at 7 or something. And she came and sat with me. She didn't say anything. She spoke, don't get me wrong, but she didn't try and comfort me. She didn't, just her presence was like a relief, knowing that someone was there. My mom was there too, don't get me wrong, but like, to have as many people in your corner, even if they don't say anything, that they're there. That's a relief. It's a relief. So we should know that no matter what God puts us through, he will get us through it, and we don't have to do it alone. We don't have to do it alone. And I've said this every time I've spoke this sermon or whatever it's called, that I don't know how to end these things, but that's all I got. So I guess we'll do the last song, right? That's next.